The world is full of stories, tales whispered in hushed tones. They send shivers down your spine. These are not just stories, they are glimpses into the darkness that lurks beneath the surface. One such story chills me to my core. It's the story of the black-eyed children. These encounters are not limited to campfire tales. They are documented, experienced, and etched in the minds of those unfortunate enough to encounter them. One such experience, the one that launched 1,000 nightmares, took place in Abilene, Texas. There, a man named Brian Bethel had an encounter that would change his life forever. It was a cold February night in 1996. Brian was alone in his car, parked outside a movie theater. The night was quiet, almost too quiet. He was engrossed in a Stephen King novel, letting the master of horror transport him to another world. Little did he know a real-life horror was about to unfold before his very eyes. As Brian sat in his car, lost in the pages of his book, he felt a sense of peace. The world outside was quiet, the only sound being the occasional rustle of leaves in the gentle evening breeze. The streetlights cast a soft amber glow, creating an almost surreal atmosphere. Brian had always found solace in reading, especially during these tranquil moments. Suddenly, a soft tapping sound broke the silence, pulling him out of his literary escape. It was a gentle, yet persistent tap, almost as if someone was trying to be polite, yet insistent. He looked up, startled. Two young figures stood outside his car, illuminated by the dim glow of the streetlights. Their presence was unexpected and somewhat unsettling. They were children, a boy and a girl, perhaps 10 or 12 years old. Their small frames and innocent faces contrasted sharply with the eerie ambience of the night. They looked like any other kids you might see in a suburban neighborhood, yet there was something distinctly unusual about them being out at this hour. The boy wore a pullover shirt and jeans, his attire simple and unremarkable. The girl had on a hooded sweatshirt, the hood pulled up over her head. Both had their hoods pulled low over their faces, obscuring their features in the darkness. It was difficult to make out their expressions, adding to the sense of mystery. It was an odd hour for children to be out alone, especially considering their ages. The street was deserted and the silence was almost deafening. They stood close to Brian's car, their small figures dwarfed by the vehicle. The contrast between their tiny forms and the large car made the scene even more surreal. The boy approached Brian's window with a sense of purpose. His movements were deliberate, almost too confident for a child his age. He spoke in a voice that was eerily calm and mature for his age. "Excuse me, sir," he began, his tone polite yet firm. He explained that they were on their way to a movie but had forgotten their money. The story seemed plausible, yet something about it didn't sit right with Brian. They needed to use the phone to call their mother. The request was simple enough, but the way it was delivered felt rehearsed, almost too perfect. There was something about their demeanor that immediately struck Brian as off. It wasn't just their presence at this late hour, but the way they carried themselves. Their eyes, though partially hidden, seemed to hold a depth of knowledge and intent that was unsettling. Brian couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this encounter than met the eye. He hesitated, unsure of how to respond, his mind racing with questions and doubts. He noticed their eyes, or rather the lack thereof. Their faces were shrouded in shadow, but as the boy leaned closer, a streetlight flickered. For a brief moment, it illuminated the children's faces. That's when Brian saw them, their eyes. They were completely black, like pools of endless night. No whites, no pupils, just an abyss of inky darkness. His blood ran cold. A primal fear, a deep-seated terror he had never known, gripped his heart. The children continued their charade, seemingly oblivious to Brian's horror. The boy pressed on, asking again if they could use Brian's phone. Their voices were flat, devoid of any emotion, like recordings played back at a slower speed. Brian's mind raced, struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. He knew instinctively that something was terribly wrong. These were not normal children. The darkness in their eyes was not a trick of the light, nor was it a playful disguise. It was something ancient, something evil. Section 4. Unexplained unease. A wave of nausea washed over him, a sensation so intense it felt like his insides were twisting into knots. He tried to steady his breathing, but the unease only grew stronger. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was in danger. a primal instinct screaming at him to flee. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle in the leaves felt like a threat. His heart raced as he glanced over his shoulder, expecting to see something lurking in the darkness. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. The leather felt cold and unyielding under his fingers, a stark contrast to the heat of his panic. He could hear his own breath, shallow and rapid, echoing in the confined space of the car. The children continued to stare at him, their black eyes burning into his soul. It was as if they could see right through him, peeling back layers of his mind to expose his deepest fears. Their gaze was unrelenting, a silent accusation that made his skin crawl. The girl, who had been silent until then, spoke up for the first time. Her voice cut through the tension like a knife, sharp and cold. It was a sound that didn't belong in the mouth of a child, a sound that sent shivers down his spine. "We can't come in unless you tell us it's okay," she said. Her words were simple, but the implication was terrifying. It was a request that felt more like a command, a demand for permission that he knew he could never give. Her voice was a chilling whisper, devoid of any warmth or emotion. It was as if she was reciting lines from a script, a performance designed to manipulate and deceive. The coldness in her tone was inhuman, a stark reminder that these were not ordinary children. It was the voice of something not human, something pretending to be a child but failing miserably. The facade was thin, barely concealing the malevolence that lurked beneath. He could feel the wrongness of it, a palpable sense of dread that made his heart pound even harder. Brian's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't breathe. The air felt thick, suffocating, as if the very atmosphere was conspiring against him. He clutched his chest, trying to calm the frantic beating of his heart, but the fear was overwhelming. The children were insistent, their pleas growing more urgent, their tone more demanding. They pressed their faces against the glass, their eyes wide and unblinking. Their voices rose in a chorus of desperation, a cacophony that filled the car and drowned out his thoughts. The boy stepped closer to the car, his hand reaching for the door handle. The sight of that pale, gaunt hand sent a jolt of terror through Brian. He knew he couldn't let them in, but his body felt frozen, paralyzed by fear. Brian knew he had to get away. These were not children. They were something else, something sinister, masquerading in youthful disguises. He fumbled for the keys, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grasp them. They were something else, something sinister, masquerading in youthful disguises. Their expressions were dark, ominous, a stark contrast to the innocence they were trying to portray. It was a deception that only added to the horror of the situation. He fumbled for the car lock, his hands trembling. The keys slipped from his grasp, clattering to the floor. Panic surged through him as he reached down, his fingers scrabbling to retrieve them. He could feel the children's eyes on him, their gaze a tangible weight that pressed down on him, making every movement feel slow and labored. He could feel their eyes boring into him, their presence filling the car with an unnatural chill. Finally, he managed to engage the locks, the sound echoing in the stillness of the night. The children's insistent pleas turned into hisses of anger, their calm facade shattered, revealing the true nature of whatever lurked beneath. Brian threw the car into reverse, tires screeching as he sped away, leaving the children standing in the middle of the empty street. He didn't dare look back. He could feel their eyes on him like claws scraping against his skin. The encounter, though brief, left an indelible mark on Brian's psyche. He knew he had escaped something evil that night. But what were they? Where did they come from? And why did they choose him? He couldn't shake the feeling that he was not alone, that others had encountered these beings. He was right. Whispers of similar encounters began to surface, scattered across the country. These whispers were not just confined to one region or one type of community. They spanned from the bustling cities to the quiet rural towns, creating a tapestry of fear and confusion that seemed to have no boundaries. People from all walks of life reported seeing the same thing. It didn't matter if they were young or old, rich or poor, the stories were eerily similar. The accounts came from teachers, doctors, farmers, and even police officers, all describing encounters that left them shaken to their core. Children with eyes as black as night appearing at their doorsteps, asking for favors, their voices dripping with an unnatural calm that belied a sinister intent. These children, often described as having an otherworldly presence, would ask to come inside, to use the phone, or to get a ride somewhere. Their requests were simple, yet something about them felt profoundly wrong. A single mother in Oregon described finding 2 children on her porch late one night asking to use her phone. She had been alone, her children asleep upstairs, when she heard the soft, persistent knocking. When she looked through the peephole, she saw 2 small figures standing in the dim light, their eyes hidden in shadow. She felt an overwhelming sense of dread and refused to open the door. Despite their polite requests, something in her gut told her to keep the door locked. She watched as their expressions changed from pleading to something more menacing. The children persisted, their voices growing angrier by the moment. They began to bang on the door, their small fists making a surprisingly loud noise. The mother could feel her heart racing as she backed away, clutching her phone, ready to call for help if needed. She watched in terror as they finally left, disappearing into the night as quickly as they had come. She stayed up the rest of the night, unable to shake the feeling of unease that had settled over her home. The next morning, she found no trace of them, as if they had never been there at all. A young man in Virginia reported being followed home by 2 children after a late-night study session. He had been walking down a quiet street, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the wind, when he noticed the figures behind him. They walked silently behind him, their footsteps making no sound. He quickened his pace, but they matched it effortlessly, their presence a constant, unnerving shadow. He could feel their eyes on his back, cold and calculating. Every time he glanced over his shoulder, they were there, their dark eyes never leaving him. It felt as though they were studying him, waiting for the right moment to strike. He ran the last block home, his heart pounding in his chest. The fear drove him forward, his legs moving faster than he thought possible. He didn't dare look back again, afraid of what he might see. He could hear their disappointed sighs as he slammed the door shut, their presence lingering long after they were gone. Even after he was safely inside, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were still out there, watching and waiting. The experience left him with a deep sense of unease, a feeling that something dark and malevolent was lurking just beyond the edge of the light. Pause 2S. As these unsettling stories spread, a sense of urgency began to take root in communities far and wide. People started sharing warnings on social media, urging others to be cautious of any unusual encounters with children, especially at night. The fear of the unknown was palpable, and the internet became a hub of shared experiences, theories, and advice. Pause 2S forums dedicated to the paranormal were flooded with posts, each one recounting a new tale of these mysterious children. Some users suggested these encounters were the result of mass hysteria, while others believed there was something far more sinister at play. Theories ranged from government experiments gone wrong to supernatural entities crossing into our world. Pause 2S. One particular post stood out from the rest. It came from an elderly man who claimed to have had an encounter with these children many years ago. His story was chilling and came with a dire warning. He described a night in the early 1970s when 2 children knocked on his door, asking to come inside. He felt an overwhelming compulsion to help them, but something held him back. The look in their eyes was not one of innocence, but of ancient malevolence. Pause 2S. He refused their request, and as they left, he heard one of them whisper, "We'll be back." The man urged readers to trust their instincts and never let these children inside. He believed they were not of this world, and letting them in would invite unimaginable danger into one's life. Pause 2S. The post quickly went viral, spreading across various platforms, reaching thousands of people. It was shared, retweeted, and reposted, becoming a beacon of caution in an otherwise confusing and terrifying situation. The elderly man's words resonated deeply with those who had experienced similar encounters, reinforcing the dread and mystery surrounding these children. Pause 2S. Hey guys, if you're enjoying the content, make sure to hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. And don't forget to smash that like button if you like the video. It really helps out the channel. Thanks for watching. Pause 2S.